Peace and welcome to our top 10 Nobuo Uematsu themes. Let me start off by saying I believe this one might be the most polarizing list we have made so far. Nobuo Uematsu has made so many good themes that if 100 people made a top 10, there would be 99 different lists. We will limit it to one theme per game because we all know there will be enough Final Fantasy for all. So let's get this underway. Number 10. Final Fantasy: The Prelude. A theme that you can find in almost every Final Fantasy game ever produced. Debuting in the first game that was released in 1987 on the Nintendo Famicom. Without this theme, Final Fantasy would still have some of the greatest music in gaming, but I think this one helps tie them all together and gives that good old nostalgic feel. Each one has a little bit of a variation, but they stay true to that one original theme all the way back in the first game. Every time I boot up a new Final Fantasy game, I wait for this theme to kick in. We played the versions from Final Fantasy I and Final Fantasy VI. And then now, here is Final Fantasy VII. Number 9. Front Mission Gun Hazard. Warning 2. Coming from a game that is not the most popular on our list today, but an unpopular game can have just as good of a soundtrack as the most popular game. One reason this list is so difficult is because Nobuo doesn't make any bad themes. Every single one has a good melody and a good vibe to go along with good mixing and good instrument selection. So I think it really comes down to just what you personally enjoy, and that's why I think everyone will have a different top 10. You could say this theme sounds like Final Fantasy, but I would take it a step further and say this theme screams Nobuo Uematsu. It has his distinct sound, especially when it comes to that SNES. He is a master of that Super Nintendo sound chip. Number 8. Chrono Trigger. Sealed Door. Coming from a soundtrack that Nobuo doesn't get much credit for. I think most people only think about Yasunori Mitsuda. However, Nobuo did compose a few Chrono Trigger themes. To be blunt, this is one of the great soundtracks on the Super Nintendo. You have some of the best RPG composers working on a single project. The hardware does have many limitations, but this soundtrack pushes it to the absolute limits. It's a good example of what the SNES is capable of. Number 7. Final Fantasy IV. Into the Darkness. Surprise, surprise, more Final Fantasy. But I do believe this is where some of the controversy begins. Overall, this soundtrack is one of my favorites by Nobuo. It's littered with great themes. It's almost easier to do these top 10s when the composer has some average themes mixed in their resume. It's easy to dismiss themes when they are a 4 out of 10 or a 5 out of 10. But Nobuo seems to only compose themes that would be an 8, 9, or 10 out of 10. This has basically everything I want from a Nobuo theme. It has a good melody and it's full of emotion. We had a few different submissions from this game, and again, this was a close one. But Into the Darkness came out on top. Number 6, Final Fantasy X, Hopeless Desire. Of course we have another Final Fantasy game. And spoiler alert, there will be more Final Fantasy themes in the top 5. When it comes to the Final Fantasy X soundtrack, I also really like Lulu's theme, and this one was a close call. However, Hopeless Desire barely edged it out. You can't go wrong with either one. Hopeless Desire almost gives me a fiendish feel at times. It's a bit dark, and I can hear a little Final Fantasy VII vibe in there. Overall, this is a top-notch theme from a top-tier composer. Number 5, Heartful Tears from Romancing Saga. Just like our number 10 entry, this theme makes an appearance in multiple games in the series, although not as many as the Prelude. To everyone's surprise, there is another non-Final Fantasy game in the top 10. Of course, this theme would fit in any Final Fantasy game. It has that patented Nobuo sound. First released in 1992 for the Super Famicom, with the sequel released a year later in 1993. I like both versions, but yet again we give the nod to the original. We will close this one out by playing Heartful Tears from Romancing Saga 2. Number 4, Blue Dragon, The Ancients. A theme that you can find on multiple Blue Dragon games, debuting in the first game and also finding its way onto Blue Dragon, Awakened Shadow. We went with the original version for a few reasons. The main one being the instrument selection. It has a very classical feel, which gives it a very clean and crisp sound. The first time I heard this, I remember getting a little bit of a Fantasia vibe. And if anyone in gaming could compose for Disney, it would be Nobuo. He brings a perfect style for it. Plus, his talent makes him suitable to compose pretty much any genre. In our bronze position, we have The Last Story, Dance of Death. Breaking into our top 3, we have The Last Story, a Nintendo Wii game that was first released in 2011 in Japan and 2012 for the rest of the regions. Now this is an epic theme. It's almost up there with the next two, but not quite. It has the feeling of a 1970s rock song. I almost get a Tarkus vibe. This theme is drastically different than our last entry, which had a classical feel. This one is fast, furious, and action-packed, something Nobuo definitely knows how to do. Plus, it being on the Nintendo Wii allowed Nobuo more freedom than a console like the Super Nintendo. The Wii obviously has more storage and less hardware limitations. Our silver entry today goes to the one and only One-Winged Angel from Final Fantasy VII. So this is where the controversy begins. But if you went with One-Winged Angel as your number one, then I completely understand. It's easily one of his best. That is undeniable. This theme is something the SNES could not pull off. To put it simply, the vocals would have to be sampled WAV files, and they would end up taking up too much space. Most Super Nintendo games only have a few megabytes, so to dedicate even just 1 megabyte to the music is too much. However, the PlayStation allowed games to be in the hundreds and even the thousands of megs. This alone allowed more storage to be allocated for the music, and in turn allowed more samples to be used. And that's what really tops this theme off. And before we get to number 1, we have a few honorable mentions. Our top spot today, the gold entry, comes from the Super Nintendo and Final Fantasy III, Dancing Mad. I'm pretty sure this was a surprise to exactly nobody. After One-Winged Angel finished number 2, what else could even be in contention? These two themes are a clear cut above everything else. However, when it comes to the Final Fantasy III soundtrack, I really like Kefka's theme. I feel it portrays him perfectly, and it is my favorite theme in the game. I went with Dancing Mad in this instance just because of the sheer epicness. It's nearly 20 minutes long, and once it gets going, it doesn't let up. In my opinion, this soundtrack contains Nobuo's greatest work. This is his ultimate score. You can find soundtracks as good, but it will be quite difficult to find one that is just flat out better. And yes, it does just come down to opinion and what you like. And in my opinion, this is what I like. So much so that we created our top 10 Final Fantasy VI themes. We know some people will be disappointed with the list, but when a composer has so many good themes, is there really a wrong answer? Our next top 10 will be Mr. Nintendo himself, Koji Kondo. You can expect to see some Mario and of course some Zelda. Last but not least, big shout out to gold level patrons Bearsona, Quantum X, and Chris Hayes. I am ICC, thanks for watching, peace.